Copenhagen endorsed, the Copenhagen Accord endorsed the continuation of the Kyoto Protocol. Of course, later we see that has a different fate. This accord requires developed countries commit economy-wide emission targets for 2020. We have seen a number of parties made their pledges and a commitment. And these parties have to strengthen their existing target prior to Copenhagen. And we see some of them did and some did not. And this also requires the developing nations, the so-called non-Annex 1 parties, implement these mitigation actions to slow growth, right? To slow growth. It's not the absolute reduction, slow growth of the carbon emission. So this was, so if we look at the Copenhagen pledges over there, we can see two categories. One category on the left is the absolute reduction of carbon emission, greenhouse gas emission, and the right-hand side, another category is the relative reduction, to reduce the energy intensity. Here we can see, for instance, China pledged to have a 40 to 45% cut in energy intensity. You can look at the EU and 20 to 30%. 20% for sure, 30% conditional. So these United States, for another example, 17% over 2005. And the EU one is compared to the year 1990. For China, it's not only pledged to cut the energy intensity by 40 to 45% carbon intensity, but also there are some additional pledges. For example, the renewable energy, well, not exactly renewable energy, non-fossil fuel energy to achieve a target of 15% energy mix by the year 2020. There is also a pledge of 40 million hectares of forest coverage increase and the forest stock by 1.3 billion cubic meters per year. So basically, 1 cubic meter per person. A few years after Copenhagen, let's see what these countries have done to live up to their promises. And the United Nations Environment Program, each year they come up with the so-called gap report. Basically, they review what is needed, what is the emission reduction needed to achieve the 2-degree target agreed by all the nations. And what has been pledged and how well these countries, these parties, has been going in achieving the target they have themselves voluntarily committed and made the pledge. Well, in this review, the recent review they just released 2 months ago, and they realized among the 13 parties here they reviewed, and some countries, some parties are doing pretty well. Australia, China, European Union, India, Russian Federation appear to be on track. So this is good news. This is good news. So that means these are some of the good guys. They do pretty well. And there are some countries, they have not done so well. Canada, Japan, Mexico, and the United States were named over there. So even with the help of economic crisis, so these countries have not really done very well to live up to their promises under the Copenhagen. I'm a professor, I don't have to say good things about the new leadership. But, they were talking about this race awareness in the international relations. Race awareness about human beings sharing a community of common destiny. I mean, this is an old idea. It's an idea of at least 2,500 years developed in the ancient China. Now the new leadership is restating this for the international relations and also restating something we call it ecological civilizations, right? Toward addressing these issues. So basically, that means, the world, all the countries want to work together. China wants to make that very clear. It wants to work together to collaborate to address this common threat, unprecedented common threat. So the question now is, looking for next year, can China be accounted on? Well, China made it very clear this is a common threat, and China is one of the major victims of climate change. And there are many reasons for China to act. And China now also promoting this idea. For the last 20 years, we have reframing the climate change issue as a science issue, as an economic issue. We have, for the negotiators, it has been, how would you partition the responsibilities among all the members? And China now is advocating a new thinking and to moving from this threat or responsibility partitioning towards a more of opportunity sharing. Climate change, for the first time for the human history, provides this opportunity for human beings to work together. Never in our history as human beings have an issue. We all face it, and there are all consequences on every one of us here. So this actually not just a threat, it's also opportunity for us to learn how to share with each other.
You were quite positive about Copenhagen. Do you think this is enough to prevent dramatic climate change? What was agreed there?
Now, I think the consensus has been developed. If you look at the UNEP report released, the new one 2 months ago, and the answer is very clear: no, it is not enough. It's far from enough. So bottom up is not enough. Just like Kyoto was not enough, and that the Copenhagen was not enough. I think that is a profound question we should all ask ourselves. How much more can we do, right, beyond Copenhagen and toward Paris?
And how do we get there? Are you saying bottom up is enough, or you also need?
No. I don't think so. In terms of governance, I think the bottom up is top down is very, very much needed, and bottom up is also very much needed. You don't. It's not either or. You need both.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And if you look to top down, that would then mean a global agreement.
A global agreement. I think if we can ever achieve that, that would be a really wonderful thing to do. And considering the international and national governance, looks like we still face lots of challenges. Some of those challenges are some legalities you have to work out. For instance, in the United States, you need to get the Congress to ratify any kind of a global agreement over there.
Yeah, is that likely to happen, according to you?
Well, we have a lot of experts in the audience. I would leave that to everyone to think about the answer to that question.
Yeah.
Right.
But you say we need to strive to such a legally binding international agreement?
Well, legally binding is a very interesting idea. And there are some areas, international affairs, you can actually do legally binding, and there are many more. It's really hard to enforce even a legally binding agreement. So I think for this issue of climate change, and for a long time, at least 22 decades, we have been framing this issue as a science issue, as an economic issue, as an international political issue, as a legal issue. But in fact, it's perhaps, I would like to quote George Akerlof, the Nobel laureate in economics, this is indeed a moral issue.
What do you mean by that?
Well, I mean that it's just like the world peace, right? You don't really calculate the cost. Well, you do calculate, but you don't, the first place you calculate the cost, you don't actually partition the responsibilities of that. You take the moral leadership to do that, just like what the EU did, before Copenhagen, right? So I thought that was really great, leading the world into a, more of an elevated vision and level of morality in order to solve this problem. Because now we are, I think the science is very important, the economics are very, very important, but now we should really add one more dimension, the moral dimension of the issue.
You're saying that the EU used to have that role and now doesn't have it anymore?
Well, I don't want to offend anyone, but I think at Copenhagen, in a way, I think the EU had lost a great opportunity to see that moment. Right?
Why?
Well, when you look at, for instance, back then, I had that's 20 to 30%. 30% is conditional. Well, interpreted outside is, yes, we can do 30%, but we're not doing it. But that's not leadership.
Yeah. And for you, in this way, the EU lost a bit the role it played before because of that.
I actually, in China, we say you look at the people. Now, talking to the people and a lot of friends, Europe here, I feel very encouraged. I feel, the general society and the people really supporting having a great and greater leadership on this issue, and I'm very hopeful of that.
So you're still counting on Europe to play that role? That's what you're saying?
I'm counting on everyone, the Europe, U.S., China, everyone, because climate change is not just a European issue; it's a global issue. It's a global threat.
To what extent is the severe air pollution experience in some parts of China changing the attitudes in the Chinese government for climate change?
Yeah, let me try to answer these questions in the opposite order. The severe pollution has really changed the attitudes of the public, and they have voiced their frustration on the social media, on various platforms. And this is why I say it's really made this issue a political issue. And people are not happy. They're angry about this. So the government responded very quickly and I think quite forcefully, by coming up with the air pollution control action plan. And already we have seen the energy caps that have never been materialized in the past. Now all of a sudden this become a reality. So I think that's really pushing for this. There is a co-benefit between air pollution control and climate change actions.
What would be your remark or your reply if I would make two suggestions? First is that Ban Ki-moon in September is calling together the heads of state to prepare for the global conference to take place in Paris in 2015. It would be marvelous if China could bring forward a policy concept. That's what we are doing. So as to put a standard, like we try to do in the EU, but if we would do that together with China and with others, that could pressurize a number of countries that may not be ready. And I do not want to single out any country, but we know that in the United States, for example, the debate is very difficult. So if you were able to come out, I think that would be a tremendously important sign. And the second element is if a sign could be given when the peaking of the emissions could be gotten under control. Because otherwise, people are getting demotivated in Europe because emissions keep growing and growing. And nature shows, the IPCC shows, that the emissions have to go down. So it's only when major industrial powers like China are going to have a peak and then go down that we are going to see a change. So what is the likelihood, if we ask to China, to determine at least the point in a not too distant future on when the peaking is going to happen?
Great. Well, let me first thank you, Jos. Let me first agree with you on the importance of having the leaders come together and to build a political consensus internationally, globally there. Because our negotiations has been going mostly on the technical levels. And this political level, political consensus building has not been given, in my view, sufficient attention to that. I think it's really, really great for the leaders internationally, globally, come together and show their vision, their willingness, want to together address this issue. I think that's extremely important. Then if we have that, then it will make the life of the negotiators like yourself a lot easier, right, to work out the details, how to achieve that. Speaking of the details, I think this peaking, the size of the peak, timing of the peak, very, very key, not just for China, but also for the other major emitters, and including developed and developing nations. I think just indicate a hope, right? And there is a hope sometime in future. I think that's very important. That's why I'm very encouraged when NDRC, for example, now really seriously considering the research on that. We have seen across the board the research community internationally that come up with times like as early as 2025 and as late as 2035. And people ask, exactly which year should that be? In my view, I think these studies all have their justifications, for come up with these numbers. And a lot of this, I think, have to do in this range, reasonable range, the justifiable range. A lot of that have to do your political determination. It's a political will. We want to make it 2025 or let's take it easy, make it 2035. So this is, I think that's a great question.
In this regard, what the European Commission has laid on the table of lately, is that for you, enough or encouraging?
I think you have to calculate by yourself. According to your energy 2020, for example, you can achieve 25% already by the year 2020. That leaves 15% to go for the decade from 2020 to 2030. Already we have seen some research organizations seeing this is not enough. They voiced their opinions. I have never calculated that. And as I said, of course, people look at Europe. Europe has been traditionally our leader, or a great leader on climate change. And I think it's really up to the EU and the member states. I know how difficult it is to come up even a 40% cut for 2030. It's very challenging among also increasing number of member states. Right?
But can I make a clarification? Because indeed the 40% target is 40% less in absolute terms.
Yes.
And at the same time, China and other emerging economies have not yet defined a peaking moment, so keep increasing their emissions. So what is the population and what is emerging in our policy debate? We are reducing minus 40%, others keep increasing, so there is no help. So the climate is not improving, the total amount of emissions is growing, and that is undermining the political capital of support that is necessary for making the decisions that are necessary.
Does he have a point here?
Well, let me say this. I direct a team of 30-some people, and I consider myself a leader, and I have to provide the leadership. There are many occasions I have to do things regardless what they do. Then, that's what I think the leadership means, right?
Yeah. Right. Maybe to finish, is it thinkable that the EU and China, before this conference, because these are two regions who really have a climate policy, are looking for this consensus together among their leaders and to come out together with something very strong? Is that thinkable, or are we too close to the US to do something like that, for instance?
Well, I would not say we are too close to the US. I think
But
we want to
yeah.
work with everybody who would like to work with us, and we work very well with China. The point is that working together and defining a precise objective are two different things. And I'm not saying that for China, I'm saying that particularly for the United States. Because the United States are helpful, and John Kerry is really marking a change. It's very useful, but still, also the United States have to define an objective which is comparable to ours, because we are highly industrialized nations, and China coming forward is the ideal way to pressurize the United States. So in that sense, China could show leadership that is very much hitting a chord, I think, towards the other part of the Atlantic Ocean, seen from this side of the...
Does that hit a chord with you?
Well, you know, it's really hard for Jos and I have a debate because we often agree with each other. And
what will Europe take to the conference in New York in September to prepare the Paris conference?
Well, I think that my president
is going... We will show up very weak position.
Well, I would not be that dark. I mean, we have a good record. Huh? I mean, let's face up. Nobody in the world has reduced its emissions as Europe did. And nobody in the world is as specific as what we are going to do in the future as Europe is doing. We still need the confirmation of the 40%. So we are halfway in the policy cycle. But still our leaders can go to the Ban Ki-moon summit and say, hang on, we have been doing what we promised. On the renewables, we are doing what we are promising. You know, we are not just putting in place a law and not implementing the law. Generally speaking, we are on track. There is here and there a laggard that we hammer on board, but all in all, we are delivering our targets. So the final word is not going to be there in the Ban Ki-moon summit. But after all, in Warsaw, at the COP last year, we agreed that at the latest, in spring 2015, countries must be ready. And that was behind my question to Qinghua. Is China going to be ready? If China is going to be ready in spring next year, and we are going to be ready, I'm rather confident on that, then we would have a golden opportunity to pressurize others who may not be ready, like the United States. Perhaps they will be ready, I hope they will be ready, but they may not be ready if you see how difficult it is to have a debate on these things. But also other countries may not be ready. Is India going to be, is Russia going to be ready? Is Saudi Arabia going to be ready? I mean, I'm not sure. So there are a lot more that need to beef up their analysis than only Europe, United States, and China.
Do you think an ambitious agreement in Paris is still realistic to believe in it?
Yes. The thing.
Or legally binding targets. Yeah.
But now that's a very important addition you are making. The question that was raised also to Qinghua is, what is legally binding? We in Europe are used to the Kyoto Protocol construction, which is the United Nations construction. You negotiate, you have targets, and then you impose the targets on every single country, the top down. In Copenhagen, the world at large was saying, Europe, we are not following you. That's brutally, and in two words, what happened. So since then, we are trying to engage the world on a bottom-up process to which Qinghua was appealing. And the bottom-up is that every country would voluntarily come with a plan that we then would check whether that plan is good enough. And that plan would basically be officialized in Paris at the COP. Are we going to have all the replies? Also, Qinghua was clear, no. But after the COP in Paris, there is going to be a follow-up to the Paris COP.
But the disadvantage of this approach is, of course, if you say everybody can put up his own voluntary thing on the table, how can we be sure that this will be enough to prevent dramatic climate change?
That's why we are insisting a lot on the hardcore of Kyoto that should maintain, which is good data, good monitoring, good checking. Every year, are you on track? Where can you do more? Where can you do less, etc.? Because we should not look at this with a too much European view on that. For us, we are a highly industrialized continent. Power generation and industry is the most worrying part of our emissions. For a country like New Zealand, it's cattle. For a country like Brazil, it's tropical deforestation. For a country like Indonesia or the Philippines, it's absolute deforestation and replanting. You know, there are many different ways of looking at how to avoid CO2 emissions. And I think we have to be a bit more refined. Also, we are highly industrialized, also almost post-industrial. Compare that to China, where they keep industrializing. So all these different realities are today the reality of negotiating a climate agreement or negotiating whatever, but in particular the climate agreement and the United Nations, and all these different elements have to be brought together.
My point is what Qi was saying, there is a lack of leadership. The position, we will do it whatever may happen. We will not only rely on mathematic figures. We know these things have to be done, and the rest will follow. So do you think Europe has the strength and the conviction to go for it in Paris? Because I have the impression that Europe is weakening, and the world outside is also seeing a weaker Europe because of the economic crisis.
That's what Xi was saying in a way.
Yeah.
You used to be the moral leader, now it's less than that. Do you agree with that? Or?
I think we have to nuance here. Europe is weaker generally worldwide. I think we never thought that, but what is happening in Ukraine shows that, what was happening in Syria, what is happening in the Middle East. You know, let's not have any illusions. The place of Europe in the world has been shrinking. And that's generally the case. Now, if we talk climate, then I think I would nuance. What we are doing stands up. Nobody in the world, nobody engages itself for a target for 2030, and certainly not a target that is comparable to the 40%. Emissions per capita in the United States are at least twice as high as in Europe. Twice as high. So that's quite something. And they are equally industrialized. The emissions per capita in China are equal to the one in the European Union. So, I mean, there are orders of magnitude that we have to respect, but the world is tired, that's true, of the European Union coming with the finger in the air, like was in Copenhagen, and having a bit of a moral high ground. You know, you, the world, should do this and that and there. I mean, that has gone to a halt, and I think we no longer do that. What we do is, or what we say is, look at what we do, full stop. And that works with China. They are now, in terms of our car standards, construction standards, they are looking at the benchmarks we are using in the cement sector and the steel sector. They are copying what we are doing widely. The ETS system is being copied. We give all our software to them for free. We no longer talk about it in speeches or
to China.
To China.
And to other countries in Africa, for
if they want, yes, but Africa is not ready for an ETS type of system. But Korea as well. So we share, in fact, without high rhetoric, because we know that may not always work. Everybody wants to invent their own policies themselves. And nobody wants to be taught by Europe what they should be doing.